Hey, what's up, guys? Node Investor here. How's everyone doing on this wonderful weekend? My screen will be coming up here in just a minute, so you probably can't see anything, but I've got you. So hopefully you guys can hear me. I just switched the mic over, so hopefully it sounds okay. If it sounds bad, let me know. These charts will be coming up here shortly. So what I want to do today is cover a few things. Obviously, we will take a look at the charts. We will look at what to expect this week, just some levels to watch. And we'll look at a few names that are strong, some names that are setting up. And also want to talk about just kind of more strategy and what to, the different ways to do it, right? We're doing like quick trades, short trades, taking the profits, but I think we're going to start moving into a season period where the swing trade will be more advantageous, which is good. Ultimately, that's better trading. And so I think we're getting really close to that. So that's good news. There'll probably still be the quick trade opportunities, but once Bitcoin starts to trend and starts moving in a positive direction consistently, the swing trading is going to be where you want to be ultimately. And ride the trend as long as you can, keep wider stops, all that fun stuff. So let me see. I think I've got the charts up, so hopefully you guys will be able to see that in a few minutes, a few seconds. Let me see here. Share. All right, it should come up here. Cool. Well, I hope everyone is having a good weekend. I was away for most of the first half of my day. Hadn't really checked the charts. I did a little bit in the morning, but just very briefly, and haven't really done a whole lot up until just before this call. So been a little quiet, but hey, that's good. We all got to take a little time off, enjoy the weekend, relax, refresh a little bit. I think the week's going to be interesting here. So let's take a quick look at BTC. Oh, and I forgot to mention at the tail end of this, so the first half will be kind of talking markets, talking analysis, strategy, and in the second half, I'm going to do a little bit of a kind of educational type of thing and focus on reading bases and breakouts and playing them like that. So just for those that are newer to what bases are and what it means, support and resistance. I know a lot of you guys have taken my technical analysis course, and so it may be a little bit of rehash for you, but so I'll save that to the end. But if you want to stick around for that, that's going to be the focus, educational focus part toward the end. So real quick, BTC hanging around that 7K mark and looking okay. So here's the daily chart, right? Very much still have not broken the downtrend, and that's going to be the thing to really be watching here this week. We're getting really close. You can see this lower support line. We've kind of been going sideways here for a few days now, a week. Very, all things considered, it's been a relatively quiet, sideways moving a little bit of a week or so. And so not the trending markets, and we're kind of chopping around here, still living below the declining 10 EMA, bouncing into that. We're right there trying to break above. You could argue this is a little bit of a double bottom. That's certainly a valid pattern here. And so you can see there's a little bit of a double bottom starting to form on this daily chart. It'll confirm if it breaks above 7,400 or so, which would also get above this little bit of a trend line, get above this moving average. But the bigger resistance, if you want to call it that, the more kind of significant level is right around that 7,700, just above that. So we could have a little bit more of a rally, and that would take Bitcoin up around 10% higher from here, and then start fading into that zone. So that's the level to be watching here on the upside if we continue to move higher. Volume was okay yesterday, not too bad. It was the weekend, and I've noticed it tends to get a little quiet, but it's my Sunday evening. Some of your guys' Monday already. And so I expect the action to begin. That seems to be the crypto schedule I've noticed is like, that Saturday to early Sunday, it's a little bit quieter than normal. You can see we had that really weird quiet period on Friday, and then of course we had the little breakdown. Looks like that was the test. They were trying to take out the stops, so we didn't see the big sell-off. Went quiet for a little bit, and then the big pop. And since then, have just been stair-stepping our way higher here, and everything looks pretty good so far. I mean, the 4-hour on the bull momentum index is living up here in the high area here, which is good. So following this signal, you would continue to ride this trend higher. If you look at the 1 hours, not bad. We are starting to roll over a little bit on this RSI, starting to show a little bit of weakness. So the underlying strength is starting to wane a little bit here. The momentum index is the same, but the trend is still there, right? We're kind of making this series of higher lows so far. And so that's all positive, right? In the near term, it's not bad. It's just kind of sitting there, bouncing higher a little bit. But, there's a little bit of distribution. You can see this big volume reversal here at the top. And this is Bittrex. Let me go to a little bit stronger of an exchange, higher volume. Coinbase moving higher here. Here's Bitstamp, but you can see there's been a little bit of distribution here near the highs. The bigger red bars versus the green bars, and RSI is waning a little bit, and so just it's kind of neutral, I guess. But going off the longer time frame, the 4-hour, still positive. I mean, this is moving higher. Like I said, the momentum index is strong, living above the moving average. You're getting these normal pullbacks with these big volume pops, and then a little bit of a pullback. So we'll see if this next leg up is moving higher. But 7K is not bad. It's trying to form a little bit of a low here. Like I said, a little bit of a double bottom on that daily chart. And so it begs the question, right? Is this the low? That's the ultimate, the $1 million question that we have all been asking for the last 3 months is, when is this thing done, right? And I know I'm with you guys. We're all tired of like having to manage Bitcoin in this little couple $100 plus or minus ranges. Like it's not as exciting, right? It'll get there, but it's just kind of this. We get these little bumps and then the big sell-offs, and now lately it's just kind of like, oh, if it drops $100 or $200, we're getting out. If it goes up 100, it's like. It's small ranges, right? It's tiny. Luckily, a lot of the alts have been moving pretty good, and we'll look at a few of those. But where is the bottom? And so I want to look at two things. First, the sentiment readings, right? And some of the news that we're seeing. It's like almost common knowledge out on the streets now that Bitcoin is dropping and going lower, and Bitcoin is ultimately going to go to 5K or 4K or 3K. That's it. Everyone's agreeing to that. That's common knowledge. We're all expecting for lower prices, and people got their buy orders down at 3K and 4K. And when the majority of people start to lean on one side, very often that starts to be a good contrarian indicator and marks, a low point, right? And I'm starting to get that sense of it's just bad out there, right? You watch CNBC, you read the financial news, and everything is like Bitcoin's done, Bitcoin is dead, and all that. And so I'm not saying we're not going to go lower, but what I'm thinking is we could get that final leg down, that final washout, that everyone goes, oh, here it goes, it's done, and then we start to rally higher, right? And so bottoms happen two ways. Oh, and the other thing on the news side first is you're getting more reports of the big money, the quote unquote smart money, coming into the game now, right? There's the Soros news, there's the Rockefeller Venture Fund news, and there's just a lot of institutional infrastructure being put in place. Coinbase has their custodian services. There's more OTC stuff. Obviously, there's already futures. There's talk of ETF being put back on the table. And so from the big money perspective, those type of things don't happen near the very top, right? The smart money is going to start positioning itself after the big pullback, closer to the bottom, because they have the longer term view and they're thinking, okay, this could continue to go down a little bit here in the short term, but in the longer term, right? When you start talking 6 months out, 12 months, 18, they're taking the longer view. And you don't see the smart money starting to move big time into a market near the tops. It's generally the other way around. And so the news of that is kind of encouraging. I mean, no one's, I doubt very many people here are fans of George Soros. And I disagree with him 99% of the time, but he's just and he's honestly, he's not the guy trading anymore. I mean, he's kind of way past his prime, and he's got a family fund and he hires fund managers. So that being said, the smart money, the big money is definitely moving in this direction, right? So that's kind of good news. ETF will be good news if and when that happens. But here's the thing with bottoms. So they tend to happen in a couple of ways, right? One, they happen what I would call violently, right? And it's very stereotypical of major tops and bottoms, is when you get these type of actions, right? Like what we saw in February, that crazy climactic extreme selling, the blood on the streets, as you will, and high volume, just massive volume, right? So that's one way bottoms happen, and tops too, right? Usually you get trending markets, and you'll see, I mean, it happened here, right? You get this strong trending market, and then near the top, right, it's very choppy, very volatile. The battle's taking place, but usually that tends to happen at the turning points. So the same with the bottom, right? You can get these violent kind of climactic washouts, and those tend to mark the bottoms. And if you go back into Bitcoin history, you'll see more often than not, the bottoms look like this, right? They're the big sharp move down, and then the bounce, and then it settles out, and then they start going. The other way that bottoms will happen is the sellers just dry up, right? You get this kind of action, and it starts to kind of meander its way, and it almost gets like boring and quiet. And then out of nowhere, there's some sort of news or some catalyst, and you see the big volume pop, and then it just kind of pulls back in, but then that's it, and then it starts to go. And so that's another way that bottoms happen, is you kind of get that flattening out, the little bit of a tail, if you will, and then when it's least expected, you kind of get the out of nowhere big move off the low, and then maybe a little bit of a pullback, and then things start to run. A good example of that would be a lot of the alts, the way the alts look right now. I mean, if you go to something like ICX, you go to some of these other names that have had these big moves off the low, and that's what they look like, right? They're kind of coming down, the big drop, and then boom. EOS had something similar, right, where it was just, how low is this thing going to go? And then out of nowhere, you kind of get that massive pump, and it just starts to the trend change. And so you start to see that, right? So that's another way that bottoms happen, right? Here's Cardano, maybe doing something similar. It's kind of meandering, getting a little bit of quiet, and you could have a big pop to the upside. When you start to see more and more of those moves happen, that tends to be a big turning point, right? So could that happen in Bitcoin? It could. I mean, there's a lot of things that could drive that. There could be positive news, some sort of catalyst. Maybe China opening up exchanges, just different things. We just don't know, right? There could be any kind of event, but those are the two ways that we're going to see a bottom happen. If I had to guess which way we would see it, unless we see some sort of big event here, I'm going to say we're going to wash out, have the pullback, and then start to go, right? The final kind of throw in the towel move. Everybody kind of gets tired of the downward movement, and then there's the big washout. Everybody freaks out and we're done. And the other way is, like I said, just kind of this low, maybe we've already hit the low point and it just starts to meander, going sideways, and then we get a big pop. So if we see that, just out of nowhere, a big daily bar that just happens to move higher, one, that's going to cause a massive short squeeze, right? So you'll start to get momentum if it starts to do that. And the other thing is it can be news driven. So either we'll see that big pop and then a little bit of a pullback, and then it'll start to go. So that'll be something to watch out for. Like I said, this next week, maybe 2 weeks, it's going to be very interesting to see how these couple bars play out here. If you missed my video when I said Bitcoin's going to bottom out in April, there's still that potential, right? That, hey, this is mimicking the 2013 cycle. And I kind of extrapolated some ratios, and I had the bottom in that video right around April 20th, 23rd or so. And so another week from now, and so that's something to keep an eye out, right? And that's still in play, and I'm still going off of that. So that being said, what's the strategy? And so one thing I want to talk about is the type of trading, right? So in this market, when you're fighting the headwinds, right? I mean, we had this rally, which was a relatively long period, right? A couple of weeks of just very good action, bases, pumps, and all that. But then since then, right, this has been tough because you take advantage of these little moves, these little pauses, and even now, right, we could take advantage of this because there's been some pretty good breakouts in the alts. But the strategy, because the longer term trend is still down, the strategy is you just got to get in and out of the way pretty quickly. You know, it's tough in this market to hold for a week or two at a time because any kind of weakness in BTC and everything just starts to sell off. And I think that's starting to switch, right? Going back to a more swing trade type, a little bit longer hodl, right? Not holding for an hour or 24 hours or 40 hours, but more for a few days and weeks at a time, and staying with the trend as long as possible. And the strategy changes there because instead of putting these really tight 3% stops or 5%, now you give it some wider room. And yeah, you're going to give it 8% or something, but you're expecting 25, 30%, maybe more on the upside over the longer period of time. And so that's going to be the change that I'm looking for. And I think a lot of these alts are starting to move in that direction where you probably will have done better if you hold them a little bit longer. You still got to maintain stops and play the trend. And if it gets climactic, take profits, but it'll just be better to do trading when we're in that environment. So that's what I'm looking for. And that's going to be the, when we start to turn the corner and Bitcoin looks like it's really starting to move higher, that's going to be it, right? It's going to be more hold longer as opposed to take quick profits. The strategy is going to switch a little bit. And so just a heads up on that. And I'm preparing for that, right? Mentally, I'm still very much in the be cautious. The trend is still down. And until we get confirmation, bank some profits and just kind of get out of the way. But that will change. So what do I mean by April 2016 to 2030 special washout? I think we'll see a low point. Could be that washout. It could be maybe not a washout. It could be, Bitcoin doing this for a little bit and then boom, the big pop, whatever the catalyst is, and then it starts to trend higher. And so that's what I'm looking for, right? Is kind of that next signal. Personally, I would prefer the washout just because it would be kind of that last, we wash everything out, but it needs to be followed through by something like this, right? It needs to be the wash and then huge volume that just starts to trend. Otherwise, if it's just a washout and it goes flat, then it just shows more underlying weakness in the market. So we'll see. I'll take it either way. We want a bottom ultimately. Let me see which, we never had that exhaustion sell-off. And here's the thing with the exhaustion sell-off, right? There's still the possibility that this was it, right? Because in February, that was the highest volume. I don't know if I can say ever, but pretty close. Certainly on a lot of exchanges, it was the highest volume ever. And that was just massive capitulation. The low was there. We were going down fast. It hit 6K. There's a possibility that that was the exhaustion selling. This was a little bit of a counter trend rally. Now we're retesting, and then we start to meander sideways and go higher. That's still out there, right? So maybe that was the low. Otherwise, we're going to undercut that slightly, scare everybody out, take out the stops, and then go. And so that's what I'm looking for. So let's go through a couple of other quick names here. Wanted to just talk strategy, talk BTC, some of that. Near term, it's looking okay. The daily chart looks pretty weak, though. I mean, if you look at the RSI on the daily, I mean, this is not a strong chart by any means. 4-hour chart, though, not too bad. Now, you guys know I talk RSI bands a lot. So when something is living sub 60 or in and around that, that's a weak RSI. And what that means is when something is in bear mode, the RSI tops out around that 60 mark. And so I tend to watch for that as a top when something remains in bear mode, and the RSI bottoms out at the lows, right? In the 30s or below when something is weak. When it shifts gears and it becomes a stronger a name, then the RSI shifts where suddenly the lows are now around the 40 and the highs start to get up here 70s and above, right? So you get these peaks up here, you get the pullbacks down to the 40s and then higher. So we're still in the daily chart, we're still living in this kind of bear zone on the RSI. I know some people say, hey, RSI is over 50 and it's bullish, it's in the bull zone. It's not so clear cut. It's more like a range. It's kind of a band that shifts up and down. 50 happens a lot in RSI. And so it's not a good enough number for me that, oh, it's above 50. I mean, that's a good signal if you're trading, but it's not a good enough, like, is it the bull trend now? Getting above 60 would certainly help confirm that. So that's what I always look for. You can see that in some of the names that have been strong here lately. Let's look at like Ontology, for example. Is pulling back finally, but pausing, right? You can see that here. I mean, look at where the RSI bottomed out on this consolidation, right? In the 40s. And then you can see prior to the breakout, this RSI was just not able to get above 60. And so you can find that, right? So you can see it just rallied, but then it finally broke out, and now it's living in this upper band. And so definitely one of the stronger ones. If you go to the daily chart, I know there's not a lot of history, so but it's certainly in the bull zone still, but definitely got overbought a little bit and just needs to rest. And my indicator was like living at 100 here, and usually like when it's at 100, definitely overbought. And so that's Ontology, very strong. I think it just needs a normal pullback. That's all we're seeing here. So would you have a long in place if this breaks above 72-ish? You know, honestly, if you want to go long, I think going long is the place to go here. This is it, because here's why. Let me go back to BTC. Scaling in and around this level is ideal. Yeah, the RSI is still not strong, but you're at the trend, and so when something looks like it's starting to trend, then buying dips into the trend gives you a little bit more margin, right? Because instead of buying a breakout, what if it's a failed breakout and it pulls back in, and even a normal pullback, right? Buying this little bit of a dip into this moving average, you know, we've already got a trend forming, right? So it's not like it's going flat. And I'm going to cover that here when I talk bases and breakouts. But this is already a trend. This is not necessarily a base anymore. So you don't necessarily need to wait for a new high as much as if you believe this trend is going to continue, then you take an entry here, you start scaling in on these pullbacks, and your stop is relatively tight here, because if you get in here, you can say, hey, if it starts to really break this trend and turn tail, I mean, you're down 1.5% maybe, right? You can get out at 6,900 if you wanted to keep it really tight. And so that's one way to do it. And honestly, if you're, and right now my position is I'm still holding Encash. We'll get to that. That's looking a little weak right now, but I'm holding Encash and I'm holding BTC, and probably about 50% cash. So a little bit of a mixed bag right now, and mostly because of the daily, right? Ultimately, the daily is just not trending, and you guys will see that once the daily turns, instead of holding cash, I'll just sell into BTC, and I want to stay 100% in one way or the other. So like when this was going on here, that was it, right? You're staying in 100%, maybe get out a little bit during this dip, but the idea is to just stay in, and if alt opportunity arises and it'll outperform BTC, you jump on that. Otherwise, stay in BTC. Here, BTC is still dropping, and so staying in 100% BTC, I'm not ready for that yet. But near term, that's it. I would be looking for a little bit of a dip if you wanted that, because a break above 72 or so, you know, it could have another bit of a pullback here. So just kind of normal action. I'm reading some of these here. Am I concerned by the declining volume in the past 2 days? Yeah, a little bit, but I'm also considering, hey, this was a weekend, and I know that's not a normal market, but it's still a weekend. And so a little bit concerned, and it's like I said, it's not bullish, right? It's a daily bounce into a moving average. So I'm by no means saying, hey, this is strong bull. It's not by any means, right? That's why I'm still cautious. I'm definitely not going full force, head first into this thing until it turns. Let me see. I'll look at a couple more, and then we'll do some alts. How can I tell if it's really a reversal or if it's just a healthy pullback after a breakout? Ultimately, volume and where it is relative to the moving averages. And that's really the best way I tell. You can see here, this was a high volume reversal. And so you could see this bar here, right? The volume on that bar was smaller than the volume that we saw at the top above that. So there's some selling showing up here, and then it's pulling back. Now this bar still has an hour and a half left in it, so volume could exceed the prior bar. If it does, that's positive. If it doesn't, I'd be cautious, right? So that's my telltale. And then the moving averages hold up, or the trend line. Normal pullbacks of the trend line on declining volume. This is a perfect example. You saw this big volume here, and then it pulled back, and as it pulled back, volume got smaller and smaller and smaller, and then the next bar up had bigger volume. And so that's like perfect, right? That's what you want to see on those type of moves. So that's a good normal pullback. If you see big green and then massive red on the pullback that exceeds that, that's usually a warning flag. So I'd be looking for those. So far, it looks okay on the 4 hour. I'm just cautious here on the daily. The daily looks like, yeah, it could go either way, right? It's maybe a double bottom, not a strong double bottom, but it's maybe a double bottom. It could go either way. I wouldn't be surprised to see some upside personally. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me to see a test of 7,400, and then from there we'll see. Oops. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of charts, and then we'll do some bases and stuff here. So what to look for this week? Let's do Encash, just because that's one that I am currently on, and unfortunately it's reversing a little bit here. I'm still holding it. So Encash, here's what I did on Encash. I got in here initially. Let me do the sideways arrow here for you guys. Just before this breakout, I saw this thing kind of starting to take some momentum here. Breakout looked imminent, and so I said, I'm going to just take some here. I think the initial price was, let me go to Slack, I think it was 398 is where I got in on that. Buying cash at 398. And on this one, my stop loss was the consolidation just below that, right? So this little bit of a range just here, just because I thought, all right, this is an early entry for sure. There was, it could have just as easily hit the line and pulled back, and it kind of did, right? It broke out, pulled back, but it kept above the range, kept above the moving average. But I was going to give it a little bit of room. The alternative would have been to wait for another pullback to the lower trend line. I didn't think we were going to get one, which is why I jumped in. But then it did pull back. I held that, and then I had a second buy. It may be hard to see here, but it was around this blue line right here. And for me, that was kind of the official breakout once it started to clear these prior resistance points. And that's why I put a secondary buy at the blue line there to add to my position if it really got going. And you can see it did. It broke out, went up pretty good, pulled right back to the moving average, so far held. And then it started to climb. Now, I unfortunately was not watching when this happened here. Otherwise, I probably would have cleared out of the way and taken some profits there. Now that it's pulled back this much, I might just hold it because it's still kind of above the breakout point here, holding up. But what I don't like are two things here. One, you can see this was not quite the highest volume bar, but it was pretty close. And it was a big reversal bar at the top. In all fairness, this was a little bit extended near term. RSI in the 1 hour was up there. It was a little bit stretched. So I thought, okay, no big deal. I wasn't watching it anyway at that point, but when I saw this next reversal bar, that was a pretty big break. I don't like that. We had this nice breakout, a normal pullback so far to the moving average, but then it just snapped and went all the way right back to the breakout point. Not unusual to see a throwback back to the breakout point, but I don't like the volume. And so that's now kind of keeping me like, it's getting a little weak here. But if you look at the daily chart, just strictly looking at the daily chart, yeah, you can factor in those wicks. This still looks good, right? It's a clean breakout of this downtrend. It's starting to turn the corner. Volume is rising on the daily. So it's kind of mixed. I don't like that big wick, no doubt, but it's a little bit mixed. And so I'm going to hold for now. We'll see by the end of the call how it looks. Right now, it's kind of pulling right back to the moving average. So far, holding on the 4 hour, but I haven't made any changes on this one, and I'm waiting. If this one starts to really sell off more, I'll clear it out, and it will probably just take out both positions and wait. For now, it's my first position is up. slightly, 6%, not that big of a deal. And then the second position is up maybe 1% or 2. And so all in all, it's up a little bit. So if it turns into a flat trade, no big deal. Just kind of get out of the way. It'll probably turn into a small profit trade if I do close it out here. But just going to wait and see. I'm going to give it a little bit more time on the 4-hour, see if this is just a normal pullback, and then we start to see some strength come in. I think a lot of it will depend on what BTC does here in the next 12 hours or so, a few hours. So that was Encash. Substratum, I posted a link yesterday, and it's strong, still looking really good. And so this is one I'm going to talk about here when we go over basis and kind of consolidation here. But this one broke out very nice, very strong action, and looks like it wants to go higher. If you go to the daily chart, it looks like it's just getting started, in my opinion. So this is a nice break. We'll see if we can see some more follow through, but the volume looks very strong. RSI is starting to really head higher here. I'd like to see a little bit of maybe a sideways and then some go, but that one's still looking pretty good. WAN chain. So going to WAN, that broke out and just still going. Looks pretty good here. So look at the 4-hour chart. It's starting to march higher. Nice little consolidation here. Secondary entry and starting to move. And after sitting tight for a very long time. So the trend has certainly shifted on a lot of these guys. Let me see here. What were some of the other names I was watching? ELF was one that we were watching. Also starting to move higher. Kind of testing this pullback right now. So good secondary entry points, also living above the prior resistance points here, so that's not bad. We already looked at Ontology. Let me go to my list here. I had a few names that I had posted on, I think it was Friday. So we talked EOS. This is EOS USD sitting very tight, very flat still. So definitely got to watch this guy. And then EOS BTC. It's not bad, right? So the daily chart is the one I've been watching more on this guy, just because it's had these stair-step moves, pull back, moving average, stair-step move, pull back, and every move higher, you can see the volume is there, right, on the breakouts. Once it stops spacing out, you can see that it just continues to move higher, right? So it pulls back and then it moves higher on good volume, and so I like that, and I think it's still looking pretty good all around. Right now, the last 3 days have been very constructive pullback. Kind of giving you a second entry here, and looks like it wants to turn the corner. So EOS is still on the watch list, still looking pretty good. It might be one to enter here on this pullback. Binance. So BNB, I was talking about, I really want Binance to give me this handle. It's trying. I think we still might get it, right? So Binance versus BTC. Let me pull this back here a little bit. Binance versus BTC, right? You can see right at the old highs, had this big cup shape move, very strong rally right back to the highs. And so I want two things, and so far it's playing out pretty good. I didn't want it to break out because RSI was just so high, and I thought that's just going to be a bad breakout, right? It's going to be a bad breakout and it'll need to pull back. So it'd be ideal if it just paused now, let this really cool off, and then set up for a breakout. It's pulling in a little bit, so it'll either kind of pull back straight and then go, or might just kind of do one of these slow handles and then go. Now, this is the daily, so I don't expect it to put in like a 1 week handle. If it did, that would be an amazing looking cup and handle. If it just kind of gave you like 4 days of pullback or 5 days or something and then bust it out. And that would really help cool off this RSI further. So that looks good. Binance on the USD pair is still setting up nicely, still living above this trend line. It's maybe losing a little bit of that cup and handle type of look here that I was watching for, right? Like I was looking for this, it was going back. Ideally, it would have been nice if it broke out like back here. This handle is looking a little weird now. It's just like, going flat and sideways, but it's getting close to this trend line. And so you got to watch this because we could see something where it maybe does one of these and then takes off. And so that'll look good. If it does that, this will translate more into a ascending triangle now as opposed to a cup and handle on the 4 hour, which is what I was looking for. And so now it's going to be more like the ascending triangle with this kind of being the front end of the triangle and this being the back. So that's what I'm looking at, but it still looks pretty good all around, especially if BTC on the BTC chart, it continues to pull back a little bit there. And so I'm liking it, right? And I'm seeing a lot of these alts that are just they're starting to set up. So that kind of leads me to believe that hey, these lows are starting to really come in. Um, so we talked Elf, we talked Binance, Win, and Encash Sub, IOST. That was another one that was looking really good. So you can see this one just once it had that little bear flag on the bull flag on the 4 hour right here, it had that rally, pause. Once it breaks trend, I mean, that's your signal, especially the volume that came in on that trend break. I mean, well above the prior volume bars. I mean, look at that. That's probably like 3x at least. And so that was good. And it's just very strong, continues higher. On the daily chart, maybe a little extended right here, but no doubt, just very strong. So this is another one. I missed this trade, unfortunately. I wasn't watching during this this break here, and I think this happened like Friday overnight, and just has moved higher. So I'm just waiting on it, see if I get another setup on it. But these are very nice, and so one way to do it is if you're holding BTC, and we'll get there, especially once BTC turns the corner and we're able to just stay invested. Then these are nice because you can just put a conditional buy order on this little zone here, and once it pops, you're in, right? So those are just nice. Right now, it's just hard to do that because you have two options, right? Either put a conditional buy on some of these names. That means you have no stop on BTC. And so that's the alternative, right? Let me see. OMG was another one. Oops. So OMG continues to look strong all around. Looks like it's probably maybe coming back here. Found a pretty good low. A lot of volume here. You can see this is a clear bullish trend break, right? We've been in this pullback mode, and that's always just, hey, wait it out, wait it out, wait it out. Boom, right? We get the volumes coming in, starts getting a little choppy here, but volume is starting to show up. Now the moving average is turning the corner, and it looks like it wants to keep going. And I was looking at the OMG USD pair because it was sitting right below resistance, and it's just starting to edge out now, right? It's tested this level a few times. You can see it's bumped up around that 950, pulled back, bumped up, bumped up, bumped up. There's only so many times it's going to do that before it just finally breaks through, right? So especially when the trend is going like this, you know, it's going higher, and the sellers are getting exhausted, right? The buyers are coming in at a higher and higher price. And so I'd be watching this one. This one looks like it wants to bust out here. And if it does, then next level above that is around that 1030 to 1060 mark. And that's going to be this prior resistance point, and that's going to be the first real resistance area to test. But, you know, that's not bad. It's a quick, you know, that's a 10% move. Not massive, but hey, if it's outperforming BTC and BTC goes up, then this could go higher for sure. Okay, so you guys got a few names here. Yeah, the contest on Binance. How do you account for that? Anything news driven? Personally, I say take your profits quick, right? 0x, for example, last week, that was just wild. Because what tends to happen is it'll sell before the news driving it ends, right? So before the contest, you'll probably see this one pull back. And if someone's just trading it, that's it, right? You get in, you start making the profits, then either put a tight stop or just take your profit into strength. I'm not in this one, unfortunately, but all right. So let's see here. We'll do a few more. Let me do a few names, and then I will get into the kind of the educational piece. And if it doesn't get too long, I'll come back and do a lot more names if you guys want to keep going on some of those. So these names I just ran through are still good ones to look at going into the next couple of days. EOS, WAN, BNB, ELF, OMG, you know, Sub. We didn't look at which one was it here? I don't even know how it looks, so I'm gonna just pull it up here. I was watching this one a couple of days ago. Status, yeah, it's still sitting tight here. Might do something one way or the other, but it's just kind of going sideways. Not a clean base here. Dash, yeah, Dash is actually looking really good here for the long-term holds. So let me see. You guys asked for Waves. So someone's asking about Waves. So I posted a Waves dollar chart here that I have literally marked up for I don't want to say months. That's probably exaggerating. Feels like months. But it's been a long time. And so I've been watching this chart just continuing to form. Not a very sharp falling wedge, right? Usually a falling wedge, you want the angle to be a little harder, like, kind of going down 45 degrees as opposed to this gradual drop, but still not bad. You can see it's getting very narrow here. And if it breaks above trend here, then this is a pretty decent trade, right? I mean, you can see that 2 resistance points are going to be there and there, and the top one being kind of the measured move on this breakout point. And from the breakout point, it's about 45% from current prices. That's about 53% or so. And so pretty good. And jumping on it here is not bad, right? If you want to take an early entry, because your downside is relatively limited. So from a risk reward perspective, you're going to give it maybe 5-7% for the opportunity to make 25 to 50%. So not bad, right? I'm personally going to just wait, but it's on my watch list. So a measured move on a falling wedge is you take the width of the triangle. I guess you want to go the other way, right? And then you go from there. And depending on where the breakout is, I tend to be more conservative. So instead of taking the maximum width, I'll do something more narrow, and just kind of play it tight. I always do that with all my measured moves, and kind of go that way. And then you test it against where's support and where's resistance. And then you could also test it against kind of fib bounce levels. Let's see how this one plays out. So if you say this breaks out here, there's your 382 and your 618. So it could go as high as that on a fib. If it continues lower, right, just depends on where it breaks out from. And so there's a couple of ways to do it that way. And then falling wedges tend to have a stronger measured move to the upside than a rising wedge. The measured move to the downside is usually like 70%. It's not a full retracement. So they all kind of vary a little bit. Cupman handles, you can do the same thing with the depth of the handle, but typically you get about 2/3 out of that on a measured move, not the full depth. So they kind of vary. A double bottom, you just do the full bottom. Usually a pretty good measured move. Same with inverted head and shoulders. So you went into waves and BNB. They're not bad. I wouldn't be certainly wouldn't be mad at you for doing that. But the trend's still down, so you got to remember that. Let's see here. So let's look at Cardano and BAT. So look at that Cardano. The daily chart got to really pay attention to. This one is kind of basing out here, meandering its way. Very clear breakout point, right? The resistance overhead. You can be conservative and say here, or you can say there. But either way, this is a small range. If volume starts to come in, it'll probably just clear right through both of those. And so that's 6% up to maybe 12%. So that's pretty good on the daily chart. If you start to zoom in and take a closer look, this is setting up really nice. Here, I would take an earlier entry, just being a little bit more precision, and that would be my entry point there. So around that 2,300 mark. And so it's still looking good. I think this one looks great. I mean, Cardano, it's probably, I continue to believe, is one that has finally bottomed out. A lot of these names look like they probably have. Volume at the low is pretty extreme, and they're just kind of holding sideways. I think a lot of these are just they're waiting on BTC, right? The market's just kind of, okay, their alts are probably done going down versus Bitcoin. They're moving sideways now. Good action. We're seeing some accumulation on a lot of these names, and I think it's a matter of when. BAT's a little bit more volatile, not as clean looking as Cardano, but what I like about this is, it had this big pullback and finally found a little bit of a low. Is that the low? Maybe. If we do a fib on this pullback here, I mean, it hasn't even bounced to the 382 level, so it could continue higher. I like this project long term. I think it's a good one, and I think this is, had that full retracement now, found a really good low here versus Bitcoin, and rallied and didn't even fully retrace. Definitely got oversold on the RSI, and now we're bouncing. But watch where the RSI is peaking out at, right? It's not even been able to get to 60 yet, so. It's a little bit mixed signal. It's a little bit choppier and kind of a lower volume name, right, compared to like Cardano or something. So this one could just move either way. You see these big wicks here recently, just kind of all over the place. I mean, just really tough to trade this. I think this one's more like, if you like it, it's more of a longer term hold, and you kind of ride the daily chart on this one. Dash. So looking at Dash, I've been watching Dash a lot here lately. I think it's found a pretty good low, and every time it gets sub 300 level, I'm thinking, man, sub 300 Dash, that's it feels like a value. And so we've had this full retracement, definitely overshot on the downside, and trying to hold this kind of ultimate low down here that it had around that 250, 260 mark. We haven't really quite reached that. And this is, this is it here where we kind of need to see this thing bounce, right? The breakout point in Dash last year was when it broke out, excuse me, from that trend line. And that was right around 280 or so when it broke from that trend line here. Let me zoom in. Right, that was the kind of the long-term break. And this day right here and the day after, that's confirmation. And so between 287, 300, maybe as low as 275, but this was the breakout point, and we're right there, right? We're basically right back to that, 280s or so is kind of where we're bouncing. We haven't confirmed yet, so I'm waiting for that, but it's looking pretty good, and it's getting tempting, right? The RSI started to turn the corner here. It looks like it wants to start turning the trend here in the 4-hour. I think that's a good double bottom, definitely. And you're seeing some divergence here, and a lot of these names are starting to look this way. ICX, I haven't done that one yet. Let's take a look at that one. So ICX, a little bit of range bound here. So if we zoom out and look at this versus BTC, let me clear some of this stuff that I was watching. It definitely looked like it was trying to break out here yesterday. We had this rally. We've had this pretty deep pullback. Volume came in yesterday. What I'm watching here too is look at this RSI, right? It came right back to that 40 zone. If that's going to hold and it's going to remain in bull mode, and this was the low, then this is it. I think we're going to see this thing turn in the next couple of days. And so that's where you want to start paying attention to it. This is not a bad setup here. It's had this rally a couple times to this resistance point, very clear overhead. And now it's turning the corner. It's sitting right in the middle of this range. If you can see some strong volume on the 4-hour chart similar to this, even if it doesn't clear, I may be looking to jump on that one, right? Before it clears the resistance. And just if the volume really starts to come in and I can catch it if I'm watching it, then I may be looking to jump on that there. All right, we'll do one more, and then I'll get to kind of talking basis. And this kind of goes along the same lines. And then we'll look at some other stuff if you guys want to hang around for a little bit longer. So let's see here. I will pick. Let's do NEO. All right, so let me go to NEO charts. I'm going to do NEO USD. Going to the daily chart here. Man, this one has just been like free fall mode here, but this is, you can see I have this line on the chart, right? And I continue to say this mid to lower $40 range, in my opinion, feels like a good long-term value buy for NEO. And that just kind of correlates to this prior, big base that it was building. And so see if we can finally get a bounce. I mean, RSI is starting to turn the corner here a little bit. Look like it's trying. It's definitely living below the moving average, but so is everything else still. And so watching that NEO BTC, very similar story, just a long tail. Looks like it may have found a low. This was a big climactic washout day, but we're basically right there, right? That was, that 667, 665 level on the BTC chart, and we're right back there. So I just want to see some good trend reversal, right? I want to see a break above, maybe a pause, pull back, and then go. So that's got to pay attention to that. I think a lot of these are nearing a critical point here, and so is Bitcoin. Like I said at the start, next couple of days, next week or so, going to be interesting for BTC. All right, so let's do let's talk kind of bases and charts and how I look for the setups and the breakouts and all that fun stuff. If you haven't taken the technical analysis course, I kind of walk through it a couple of ways, right? First, I talk candlesticks and just real basic stuff, and then I talk support and resistance, and then what forms bases and chart patterns like cup and handles and double bottoms and all that stuff. But the methodology there is a base is simply just a point of consolidation on a move, and generally on a move higher, right? So here's a base, right? Like you have a rally, and then you have this period of consolidation pause, right? That's a base. Not every base will form a textbook pattern, right? Not every base rises and then suddenly forms, like a beautiful cup and handle, and then it goes, right? They all vary, but a base is simply just this congestion, right? This period in the price where there is a little bit of a pause, a little bit of a battle going on between the buyers and the sellers, and a range that continues to be built. And there's ascending bases too, but those are a little more advanced. But this is generally what I mean by base. And so going to WAN, you can see it was building a pretty good base here. It had this rally, pause, and then just was channeling, right, in this very defined range. And you can see there was a very clear resistance and support zones here. And it just happened that the support was just above the prior base that it broke out from. So it came down and it formed this low base here. You can say maybe this is a double bottom or whatever, but either way, it broke out and it came back, and then it held what was previously resistance. So this area was previously resistance, and then now that zone became support. And that is very common to see that, where it's a battle, right? The sellers just continue to show up there, show up there, show up there. Eventually they got exhausted. The buyers took control here. And then here, the buyer started to show up above that point. So that's very common. And you'll find that support and resistance and bases, they're at the core of my chart analysis, because at the end of the day, it just paints a picture of where the buyers and sellers are showing up, right? It just tells you that this price point is a place where you see support, and this is where you see resistance and sellers show up. And it works the same way with channeling and trending, right? So you can do parallel channels that are moving up and down, and you can see that, hey, at the top of this channel, sellers show up, and at the bottom, buyers show up. And that's just common because one of the guys that I read one time, he put it plainly. He said, price and time are linear when it comes to investments, right? And so what that means is, you can see here that the buyers were willing to show up here, but then as the price rallies higher, they're willing to show up at a higher price, and then they're willing to show up at a higher, and that's create these trends, and vice versa. When you see the sellers showing up at a lower and a lower price, right? They're not waiting to get back to the old highs before they take their profits. They're just, as time goes on, they will adjust the buy points and the sell points based on the trend. And so previously the buyers were saying, hey, I'm not willing to get in until it pulls back here. But then as time goes on, they're going to get in higher, and they're going to get in higher. And at the end of the day, we're just an auction market system, supply and demand, and they'll push the prices higher. So bases and resistance are kind of the core. And so when it comes to bases, the nice thing about these bases is you don't need to wait for an official breakout. You don't need to wait for it to clear this point, or let me move this over. You don't need to wait for it to clear the old highs before you say that's a breakout. While that may be true, it's officially a breakout because, okay, it's finally clearing all this resistance. And it's kind of interesting to see that this is where the rally paused, right here at this prior high. But you don't need to clear all that. You can get in early, and I just really like when you get these consolidations that happen below the highs, and they kind of give you this early signal, because then you build a base here below the prior highs. And so you don't need to wait for these old highs to be taken out. The signal comes when you break out at this point. And if you really were watching closely, right, you can go to the 1 hours and you can say, oh, this is probably about as good as it got here. I mean, maybe you could have pulled it in a little bit and used the candle bodies or the wicks here and say, if it clears that on the hourly, that's pretty good. I'll take that, right? But either way, it was pretty close. And so that's just nice because you don't need to wait for it to break out. When you see these bases form like this, then you clear out, right? So another one is a bear flag, which is basically a type of base, or a bull flag, excuse me. And here you see this breakout, and then it just starts to form this little consolidation, this base. And on these, it's the same methodology, right? You don't need to wait for this to be taken out, although it basically got there in one candle. But if it was deeper, you don't need to wait for that to be taken out. You can jump in on a break of the trend line, right? So when it starts to get this way and resistance is very clear, especially when they get this tight like that, then you can get in right here. You don't need to wait for the ultimate breakouts. And in fact, it's better to wait for that, because then very commonly you see this throwback, right? You see the breakout and the throwback, and then they move higher. So that's just kind of at the core. And some bases do form patterns, right? You'll see some bases start to form ascending triangle patterns, and some bases start to form, double bottoms or cup and handles. Ontology was a really good ascending triangle pattern we saw recently. And so if you go to the 4-hour, and so I begin to look for those things to form, right? So like when we saw this last week, it was like, okay, this thing is rallying, and then it had that pullback, and it went back to the resistance. And my thought was, okay, this is pulling back. And I remember talking about this on a live stream, and it looked like this. And I thought, if it finishes higher than this, then what I'm going to be looking for is an ascending triangle to build, because that's a continuation pattern following a massive rise. And this was a massive rise. It doesn't look like it now, but that was 100 and a little bit over 100%. And so that's a good run in a very short period of time, and it needs to consolidate that run. And so it builds a new base. It builds a new consolidation period. And so that's what this was. And I was looking for a higher low, and we saw that higher low here. And it began to form this ascending triangle base, right? This ascending triangle pattern where the buyers are starting to step in at higher and higher prices. They were no longer willing to wait for it to come all the way down to the lows. They were starting to step in higher and higher. And then you can see here, it got right below resistance, paused a little bit, and then boom, we broke out. And once the resistance was clear, it was a pretty quick move, right? And here we are just kind of pausing and setting up another period of consolidation in base and digesting some of that move. And so some bases do turn into nice, clean patterns, but most often they don't, right? I mean, if you get a perfect ascending triangle pattern, that's nice. But most of the time, you don't have that luxury, right? It kind of tends to look more like this, like it's just kind of choppy, messy. But it's all it is. It's just a period of consolidation. You look for volume patterns within the base. Is the sellers in control, the buyers in control? Is this a distribution base or an accumulation base, right? And this doesn't look like distribution here yet. I mean, the sellers are starting to wane here a little bit. And so bases are also provide the next level of support, right? So now if this thing pulls back, it could pull back to this little consolidation it had, maybe as low as this one here, and then pause, right? EOS is a good example of that right now. So you see EOS on the daily chart, right? It has this move, and it pulls right back, and then it breaks out, and then look at the pullback on that breakout, right? It basically pulled right back to that prior breakout. And this one here is not quite as clean, but here you're kind of trending and using the moving average. So so that's how I use them, kind of look for support, look for resistance. It's never exact. Sometimes it is, but very rarely, right? Some people will say the very, very top of the candle, that's support and resistance. And it tends to be more of a zone, right? Like, this kind of zone in here, you'll see the buyers start to show up there. So that's what I look for there. So bases, support, trends at the end of the day, right? When you're doing technical analysis, and it's funny because people always, there's a common question you hear about technical analysis. And when you think about it, you kind of, the question needs to be phrased differently. People always say, does technical analysis work, right? Does it work? And when you ask that question, does technical analysis work? What are you really asking, right? Are you asking, does technical analysis predict the future? Or are you asking, does technical analysis tell me the best time to get in and get out of a chart? Or are you asking, does technical analysis tell you where a chart's going to go, right? I mean, what are you really asking, right? And so when people say, does technical analysis work? The short answer is yes, but it depends on what you want to do with it. And ultimately, technical analysis is simply just painting a picture of the market activity. That's it. It's just telling you price points, where the buyers and sellers are showing up, and the trend, and it gives you a history, right? Okay, the trend was down, We found a low. Now the trend is up. I mean, that's it. And technical analysis, when it comes to trading, that's the whole point. The technician wants to identify when the trend changes and wants to ride the trend as long as possible and look for signs that the trend's about to change again. Like at the end of the day, if you want to boil it down, that's it. That's the whole point of chart reading is what's the trend? Is the trend going up? Is it going down? Or is it going sideways? Like that's it. There's only 3 trends. And usually it's some combination, right? We're either in a trending or we're consolidating and going sideways and setting up a new base, or we're turning the corner and it's coming back down, right? So does technical analysis work? Yes, absolutely. It will show you the trend. It will help you identify which direction the trend is going. It'll show you where support and resistance lie. It'll show you what the moving average price is. It'll show you a lot of those things. And then, of course, there's the indicators. And, you know, the problem with technical analysis is it gets a bad rap because it doesn't take a lot to do, you know, to get to the 60% of what you need to know. Okay, I could read a chart. I could read a moving average. I can draw some lines. And then suddenly you get a lot of people drawing a lot of lines and putting all these indicators on their charts, and they're saying, this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to happen, blah, 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 blah. And then, you know, very few of those actually turn out the way they said they were going to turn out, right? And the point is not that you're going to predict the future, but you're just kind of analyzing the price and where it could go and probabilities and putting that in your favor. But it's just kind of easy to learn the basics. And so you get a lot of people out there that are spitting out charts and putting all these predictions in place when they really kind of just don't understand it fully, right? So it could get a bad rap from that, and it just takes time to learn, right? So there's that aspect, and then there's kind of just here's the other thing with technical analysis, right, that people forget. It's part art, part science, and always has to be put in context with the current market conditions. And that's the thing, right? You can't always just blindly say, when the RSI hits this and this hits that and that hits that, that's a buy signal. I mean, maybe, but what's everything else doing, right? What's the market doing? What's BTC doing? And so it's always in context. Is there news? Is there this, right? So you have to kind of put that gauge on, put the spin on that. And that's why it's so hard sometimes, because you have to constantly be adjusting. You have to be adjusting to the markets, and in every new bar is just a new data point. So that's basis, that's support. You can see here, you can do basis can be, or trending can be channels as well, right? You can see where's the trend line, where's it going, is it breaking trend, you know, just kind of different things like that. But that's the core of it, right? All the indicators, it's secondary. At the end of the day, price and volume are the most important thing, and volume is an indicator. So that's the most important thing. And that's the thing with bases, though, which is nice, is they help you kind of set the tone and reset and identify support and resistance, like right here. Now, this was a little bit of a base that broke down. You know, this was trying to base out here, trying to find some support, probably going to be a next level resistance. You know, this was a base, and these bases are just nice because they give you the breakouts, the next leg up. So that's what I look for. So when you hear me talking about, you know, you missed a trade, you know, it's extended, and I always say, I'm just going to wait for a new base to set up or a little bit of pullback. This is what I'm looking for, right? I'm looking for this. I'm looking for this because this sets up. And sure, you may not get in at a lower price, but you're going to get in at the best time. And that's what it's about, getting in at the better time. You want to be in, you know, would you rather be in during this, or would you rather just be in during this, right? And that's the idea. All right, so let me see here. So that was really what I wanted to cover on the bases, support and resistance. If you had any questions on that, we could definitely do that. Do you do price? Let me see. By price, do you mean candlestick analysis? Yes, absolutely. So when I say price and volume analysis is the most important thing, I'm talking candlesticks. I used to do a lot of bar charts when I was doing stocks. They give you the same data point, but candlesticks just make it easier to digest, in my opinion. And so you could do that. You definitely don't do line, right? Because line doesn't give you the full picture. It gives you the closing price, and that's it. And so you do candlesticks just because they'll tell you a little bit more of the story. I don't try to talk about it a whole lot, but there's a lot of candlestick patterns, right? There's the hanging man. There's, you know, the hammer bottom. There's the tweezer tops, tweezer bottoms. So there's a handful of good candlestick patterns. Like when you look at just the candlestick by itself, right, in isolation with nothing on the chart, there's some people that can just trade on that. And candlesticks, right, they were, what was his name? Steve Nielsen. No, it's Nielsen, NIS, whatever. In his book, Japanese Candlestick Charting, he even says it, right, is they're there to confirm what you see using what he calls quote unquote Western indicators. So volume and moving averages and all that stuff. So even him, the guy that wrote the book on candlestick patterns, says, don't use these in isolation. Use these in context of what you're seeing in other areas, and they're there to help you confirm what you believe you're seeing in the charts, right? So yeah, I definitely use them, right? Like this is a nice tweezer bottom right here, this hammered, but you don't use it in isolation, right? You say, okay, what's the volume associated with this? If it's massive volume, the biggest volume that you've had in the week, then that's probably the low, right? The big reversal. Or if you see a candle, and there's like, you can get way into just candlestick patterns. I mean, they can get pretty complicated and very in-depth. And I'm by no means the candlestick pattern expert, but there's a handful that you probably should know and just kind of will help you all around, especially since most charts nowadays, most people use candlestick charts, kind of the most popular. In crypto, however, I must say, you have to discount the wicks a lot more than you would in other markets. In other markets, you put a lot of emphasis on the wicks, right? I mean, look at that big reversal, outside range. In crypto, you got to discount that a lot. So you don't put as much weight on those wicks as you would in, say, a stock market. One, because this is just much more volatile. You get a lot more wicks. And two, it's very, I wouldn't say illiquid, but it's smaller volume. And so it's easy to paint those wicks on the chart. In names like Bitcoin, you pay attention to them, but most other names you probably don't, because they're depends on the volume. Like this one, you would, right? That's a strong reversal there. The bar charts versus the candlestick chart, it just tells you the open close, the high low bar. That's all it is. So when you see a bar that says the OHLC, right? That's the open, high, low, close. That's what it means. And so all it's telling you is, there's a little like tab to the left. That's the open. And the bar just tells you the range of that day. It doesn't tell you, anything like what happened between, but neither does a candle. But then it'll tell you the close. And the color coding just helps you decipher that, right? So let me find a good one here. You can see this one here, right? This one's red at the bottom, but it opened here. Maybe it went higher first. Maybe it went lower first. Doesn't matter. Either way, it closed below where it opened, so it painted the bar red. Candle will tell you that, right? And it'll tell you that a little bit stronger, right? It'll tell you that the body there's the body is the open and close, and then this kind of happened in between, and just lets you read it a little bit differently. Okay, so I covered what I wanted to cover. Do you guys have any other things you want to look at? Any specific charts? I'll be back online first thing Monday, and we'll be scanning the charts. We'll see what happens tonight. You know what? Let me go through the Slack real quick. I missed some discussion earlier, and I know there was some questions. There was a good question on the alerts, missing the quick profits, and that's definitely an issue if you're not able to watch the charts, unfortunately. So you guys had some good suggestions, set the alerts. I do a couple of things, like if I'm in the office but I'm not watching the charts, or if I'm doing something, I'll definitely use the alerts here on TradingView, so you can do that. It's pretty easy. You can just like click on here, send an alert, and then the same way with Coinigy. You can say, drop an alert here on this price, and then confirm. And then this, you can set it up so that it'll send you an email, or it'll send you a text or something like that. And that's what I'll do. I'll do text. And some of them will lag a little bit. It depends. Like you'll get the pop up here right away, but maybe by the time you actually get the text message, it might be a little bit. And then I'll use a couple of apps, like if I'm really watching something, and you can use the apps usually have alerts on them too, like Blockfolio, for example, that has alerts, and you can send alerts on that. And so there's a couple of ways if you're not able to watch. And I will do that for charts that I'm watching for basing too. So if they're basing out, like when we were looking at WAN, and if it's something I really want to jump on, but I don't want to put a conditional buy on, then I may do an alert, on the resistance point, right? So I may say, just give me an alert, like if it gets right below the resistance point. And so that way, if it starts to move, I'll be alerted to it right before the breakout or right as it's breaking out. So that's a good way to do it. And I definitely recommend using alerts one way or the other, especially on a trade that you might be on. You maybe want to say, show me if it breaks out, or show me if it breaks down and crosses below a certain level. At least ping you there. And cash, we'll see. I'm still holding it. This one's not looking as strong. I think this moving average is going to form this little bit of a bear flag, and that's going to break lower. That's just my guess here, simply based on this massive reversal bar we saw with volume. So good chance I'll close this one out here shortly and take profits on that. Otherwise, I'll see if it can break above. If it can, then that'll just be a good healthy pullback to the 4-hour. And if it starts moving higher, I'll let it ride. Let's do Nano. All right, take a look at Nano. So let me go to the daily chart here. So when I do my chart scans, if I haven't looked at a chart here recently, or if I'm not familiar, that's generally what I'll do. I'll zoom out just to get a quick feel. What's the trend? Clearly, the trend is living below this moving average. If it's showing more detail, then I'll start zooming in. Usually, my favorite's 4-hour. Kind of gives me a good balanced view. You can do 12-hour. You can do a 2-hour. And then I'll look at the detail there. And if I really want to, if a name that's a little bit tighter, like Bitcoin, then you can zoom in more. And here's the 30-minute, right? But all in all, just looking at Nano, this was one I was really watching and really liking. But man, I was just waiting for this pullback to end, and it just continues to drift lower. It could just fully retrace and bottom out somewhere around there. It looked like it was trying to hold, but it just continues to fail when it breaks into that moving average. So until that changes, if you're holding it now at this point, you've basically, depending where you got in, you probably have absorbed the majority of the pullback. If you're looking to get in, I would wait personally. Yeah, you might miss a few percent off the lows, but the risk is really high on this one. So me personally, I'd be waiting until the trend turned, or at least going flat and kind of building a base, going sideways. Then you could take a shot at it. But right now, the momentum is still very much downward. You can see here, this 4-hour just broke down. It looks, just wait for that reversal. Wait for the reversal to happen. It tried here a couple times. This actually was looking pretty good with these big volume spikes, but unfortunately has broken down a little bit. Let me see here. Going back to the questions here. Note, is WAN forming a cup on the 1-day? Daily, I don't know. Yeah, I guess you could say that. It's pausing right at the resistance point. You can see where that blue line is. That's the prior high. So you could say that that could form a cup. And the moving average here on the daily is way back here still. And so that might not be a bad one here. If it does give you a day or two of pullback, then it would really set up for a nice breakout. Good secondary entry point if it does that. There's not a lot of history on this chart. And the thing with this chart is once it clears right here, which it's kind of already doing, there's no overhead resistance, right? And so this one's more jump on the trend when it dips back to these moving averages, or if it gives you a little bit of a pause here, which it could, then I'd be looking at that as a potential entry point. Yeah, moving average, it's up there. RSI is kind of up there too, so it wouldn't surprise me to see a little bit of a pullback here. Wabi, did it finally find a low? Man, Wabi, it looks like it. Yeah, see, I got the line on the chart here. I'm watching this breakout point. I'm discounting this here. So sometimes you got to do that when there's this very abnormal kind of out of the norm move. You got to pay attention to that because you're thinking, okay, somebody just bought a ton there at the lows. But in terms of trading it and looking for the base, I'll tend to discount some of those wild moves there. So that's kind of the area. Whoops, that's the area that I'm watching here on Wabi. Is can it start closing above this yellow line here? That's above that 94, 9500 area or so. Zooming out a little bit, it's definitely looking like it finally maybe has found a low, and it's starting to base. RSI is really starting to gain some momentum here, so definitely want to keep an eye on now if you like Wabi. All right, let me see. I'm gonna go through a couple more. I think I may have covered the questions. Where's my? Here it is. What indicators do you, or main points do you look for when you have a long-term hold, but it's cooled off and you want to use those funds to write another crypto? That's a good question. So ultimately, it's going to be the same methodology that that I use on the shorter-term timeframes, but I'm going to be using the daily chart for long-term holds, right? So ultimately, it's going to be that, but I'll be using the daily chart. So let's say you were in Wabi, you wrote this up, and you're thinking, okay, this might cool off. I want to use my funds for something else. Then it's generally the same approach, right? If this thing pauses, I'm thinking this could just be a base, a setup, kind of like how I was here, and then it'll break out. So stay with the trend. Once it really starts to break down and gets below moving averages and RSI starts to go into the bear zone and does one of these, then you get out of the way. Alternatively, if you, depending on where you got in, right, if you've ridden it for some time and you're up, hundreds of percents and it's starting to show some climactic signs of buying here, right, at the top of a move, you get the highest volume ever and you get these big reversals. That's signs of distribution. And a lot of times I may take some off the table when I start seeing that. The risk is, you get out too early and it pulls back a little bit and goes another leg up. So that's kind of the two main things when it comes to that. Moving averages, the volume. You can do kind of fib retracement levels. You can say, hey, this has gone too far, too fast. I'm going to wait for a pullback to this retracement or that retracement, and then maybe jump into something else while it bases. And I'll do that too. I mean, that's definitely not bad, especially if there's other things that are moving really quick. Once something has had a run, very often it will base. Then you can transition into something else temporarily that's maybe just breaking out, and then wait for that. Wait for the one you were in to set up again. Let me see here. If I think volume starts to pick up tonight, we may see. Yeah, so the Asian markets are going to be coming online here soon. Australia and all those folks are kind of their day. And I've noticed that Sunday evenings, my time, you tend to see a little bit of action and into the middle of the night, especially as Europe is online again. And so usually on Mondays, my Monday morning, like there's been a move. It just happens a lot. Not every week, but I've noticed it tends to be a little bit of a trend here. And so I'm looking out for that. If volume starts coming in, I don't know which way it's going to go. I'm looking at both scenarios and I'm thinking, okay, looking at the daily chart, I would say it's going to go lower. I mean, if I had to guess, if I had to pick just one, I would say bet on it going lower personally, just because it's the trend, the momentum's to the down, it's living below the moving average. If you look at the 1 hour, right, maybe RSI is waiting a little bit, but if you look at the 4 hour, this is not a bad trend. So if you're in it, then just stay, and I'm going to hold my BTC that I do have. I have part of a position, and I'll just hold it until it starts to really break this trend. But if I had to guess, if you said pick one, I would say probably lower, but I am looking for a low to be put in here soon. It's mixed signal. This is a tough one. RSI is diverging positively, right? It's starting to go up a little bit, but it's still, RSI is only at 40, so it's weak. And so that's what I'm saying. If I had to guess, I mean, everything is telling me the trend is still weak. The momentum is still to the downside. So, but it just, like I said, it could just as easily bump up, hit 7,400, maybe 77, and then we hit some major resistance, and that continues the downtrend. So, it's just a very tight range. We'll get past this tight couple $100 at a time range for sure, but right now it's just, I'm really just waiting this out. This is getting really narrow, kind of tightening up both ways, and I'm thinking in the next probably week we'll know. right? I mean, this is what I'm watching. Like, this is just getting tight. So should be an interesting week. We'll see what our live stream looks like next weekend. Was I a hedge fund manager before? No, never have managed money formally. I have looked into it a few times. I've had people ask me to manage money for them. And I met with, I was looking at a fund setup and meeting with the lawyers and all that, and they wanted a lot of money and the administrative nightmare that came with that. And yeah, so I decided to not. I'm still thinking about it, but it would have to be kind of like a typical fund, right, where you only work with accredited investors, because I'm not going to go get licensed and do all that stuff. It's just a lot of administrative overhead. All right, so let's see here. I think that's probably it. I don't see any more questions that I'm sure I missed some, but I don't see any. Let me see here. Today there was BNB. We talked BNB. We talked the indicators. Okay. Let's see here. I know there's going to be some people watching it on replay, so I don't want to make it too long. How do I tell if a pattern's about to fail? That's a long one. There's what they call flawed patterns, if you will. And so depending on the pattern, there's flaws, like if the handle's wedging up as opposed to pulling back on low volume. The volume patterns, like if there's too much volume, not enough volume in the middle of the pattern type of thing. So there's certain ways to look at flawed patterns, and it just depends on the pattern. Ascending triangle. Let me see. I'm trying to think of one off the top that has failed recently. I know there was one. Nano was an ascending triangle that failed. Wasn't a very strong one, but it was a little bit of a flawed pattern here. This was one I was looking at here. Right, so it had that big run up, and then it was starting to form one of these. This was actually a really good pattern, and it was setting up for a nice breakout, but then it just failed. There's no way to tell if it ultimately will fail, and the pattern that I was looking at was this. And then, you don't preempt them. I just either wait for it to break out or wait for it to break down. That was it. It was a pretty clear pattern, and it just rolled over. The volume everything looked good. There was nothing here indicating that this pattern was going to fail. RSI was cooling off, as you'd expect. Volume was pretty strong here. There was maybe some telltale signs, right? Like right at the highs, the volume was showing up. That's a reversal there. Even though it's green, it's a reversal. That's a little bit of reversal, but nothing bad. It's just once it broke down from that trend, just never recovered. And that's it. Kind of rolled over from there. There just depends on the pattern. There's really no way. I mean, you can maybe guess which way it's going to go. Some patterns are pretty clear. But. No, not always. You don't have to wait. Just always have a place. And the thing is, you can jump in before a breakout. There's nothing wrong with that. I usually like to wait, but you can jump in before a breakout. You just always have to have a place where you say, if I'm wrong, how will I know I'm wrong, and what point will I get out? I mean, the money management comes into play at that point. You could have jumped in here. There's nothing wrong with jumping in when it dips back to the trend line. And I've done that on a few names where it's like, okay, this is dipping in, especially when the breakout point is pretty wide, it's like 10% above. Then I may jump in on the lower end, but you still got to have a stop, right? Like if it just breaks down, or if it breaks below this low, then it's definitely a failed pattern. Then at some point, you just got to say, I'm going to get out of the way. And it just depends on how big of that margin you want that to be. So you don't have to wait for a breakout. It's usually just, depending on the pattern, it may just be better to wait for a breakout and then go look for something else that's setting up or breaking out. Because the point is, if you're on something and it never breaks out, it's just kind of tying up capital. What kind of starting capital would a conservative trader need to live off of as their main source? Well, one, it depends where you live. If you live in New York, you need a lot of money. If you live in, I don't know, somewhere else that's not as expensive, right? That's always the answer, right? And so you have to back into it that way. If you're just starting, what I would recommend is whatever capital you have and you're new to trading, you say, okay, here's my trading capital. It's this size of a pie, whatever that number is. If you're new to trading, take that number and cut it in half, at least, maybe more. And then learn to get consistent, right? A lot of people get hung up in, I need to make X amount of dollars per day or X amount of dollars per week or per month. That's my goal. That's the wrong approach, in my opinion, because the point is get good at being consistent, get good at discipline, money management skills, and finding the trades, because at that point, there will be weeks where you're not making any money, but your capital's being preserved, right? And there's going to be other weeks where you're having huge gains. And so it just depends, right? And you'll learn that trading is not a steady flow of income where you're just like, every day I make $200, right? Or whatever it is. It's just not that. That's not the case. It comes in waves. It comes, because the market sometimes is doing this and you're making a ton, and then sometimes it's doing this and you're not doing anything, or it's going down and you're just kind of preserving capital. So that being said, if you're in Arizona, if you're good, I would say conservatively, you probably need 6 figures, and I know some traders that their quote unquote conservative number is way higher than that. Some guys are like, no, I wouldn't trade unless I had $1 million, so it just depends on what kind of lifestyle you want. If you're good, I mean, think about it in crypto. If you can make 10% on a month, and that's huge, that's like professional level, right? Because it's just up, down, up, down, up, down. But if you're making 10% on 40 grand, you're making 4 grand a month, you could probably live on that. But you got to have some reserve, because what if you have a bad month or something? Now, I don't carry a job. I'm running Node investor full time, plus kind of my other investments, other trades and stuff like that. I've had different businesses over the years. Speaking of other stuff, man, stocks. I closed out my trade too early. I was short for a couple of weeks. I don't know. The put call option spread is getting a little higher, so maybe we will bounce, but I don't know. I think I might have closed it out too early. I covered my shorts on Monday when everyone was like, oh, it's the end of the world, and the Dow's down 700 points. And I said, that's it. Time to cover. And we had a pretty good bounce. I thought we were going to bounce higher than Friday. The jobs number came out and some other stuff, and we were breaking down again, but we'll see. I'm sitting tight right now, sitting in cash. But some of these charts just don't look pretty. I'm waiting for a good bounce, and I'm going to kind of reopen up the short positions again on the stock side, because I think they have topped, in my opinion. We'll see where it goes. Everyone's so bearish now. I think just everyone's going to start looking to go short. So maybe we will get a rally. But stocks are just not looking pretty. Metals, still watching metals, watching gold. This one's setting up. If you look at the weekly chart on this, this is like about to break out. This is like a huge base that I've been watching here for some time. I was just setting up, sitting tight. A couple ways to play this other than just buying the metal directly. You could buy the miners, which is my preference right now. You can see I've got some alerts set up. I've got some positions already open, but there's a couple good miners here that give you some leverage on the move. Some good ETFs to watch. So a couple of different things. Luckily, it's not crypto, so like this is a weekly chart, right? You don't need to watch it like every day or every hour. You can just check in on it from time to time, which is kind of nice. If it was crypto, there's just no way to do both if it's that busy of a chart. So, all right, I'm going to wrap it up. Let me go to Encash. Looks like that may be breaking down, so maybe time to just step aside. This is a bear flag. It's just not looking pretty. So put the stop in here or just close it out. RSI is definitely in the weak zone. The tax day theory, it holds a lot of weight, especially after last year. I think there's a lot of people selling because of that. Yeah. And I didn't even factor that in when I was doing my analysis on, I think the market will bottom in April, but that could be another factor. Could be another reason. And let me show you guys my chart here. Let me see here. I'm gonna save it at least for another month or two until we see how it plays out. Where is it? This is it. So we go to the weekly chart. This is it, right? I was waiting for this, looking for this. This is the top, and I had kind of the measured time frame, April 23rd. So before that, so basically 1 to 2 weeks. We'll see. Yeah, tax day here in the U.S. is the 17th. And I always wait until the last minute. I'm that guy that says, yeah, you'll get my money. You'll get it at the very last minute. There's no point in giving it to them early. I'll send you my check eventually. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if the 17th or that week. That's next week, not this week, but next week. We'll see if it bottoms out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining. I hope you have a good rest of your day, rest of your evening, wherever you are. I'll be on Slack checking in on this a little bit here this evening, my time. And so if there's any questions and stuff like that, I'll try to keep up there. So thanks for joining. I will likely do another stream midweek for our group. It'll just kind of depend on market action. Maybe tomorrow, maybe not. I'll probably just try to save it for like Tuesday or Wednesday when we get a little bit more direction, something more to talk to. So, but if something crazy happens, then we will. Let's hope we don't get too crazy. All right, folks. Have a good one. Take care.